In the cold, silent expanse of space, memories are peculiar things. They drift like cosmic debris, sometimes disappearing into the void, other times gravitating back when least expected. For Selah, a citizen of the advanced planet Thalax, memories of her brief encounter with a human lingered like distant stars, always visible, yet just out of reach. Thalax was a planet of crystalline spires and endless shimmering fields, where the air resonated with harmonious energy waves. It was a place of calculated precision, where emotions were carefully tempered, and every thought served a collective purpose. Yet Selah found herself growing restless. The memory that haunted her was of a desolate moon far from home. She had been part of an exploratory mission cataloging the moons orbiting a dying star. It was on one of these barren rocks that she encountered Cole. The humans had arrived unexpectedly, their primitive spacecraft limping into orbit. They were explorers too, though their technology was laughably rudimentary compared to Thalaxian standards. Still, Selah couldn't help but feel intrigued, particularly by one of them, a man who seemed so out of place among his crew. Cole wasn't their leader, nor was he the most skilled, but there was something in his quiet presence, a way he regarded the universe with equal parts wonder and skepticism, that etched itself into her memory. Their meeting was brief, a few shared words, a fleeting touch, yet it left a mark on her soul. Years passed, and the memory of Cole became a quiet companion in Selah's mind. It was strange for someone from the Lax, a people who prided themselves on their logical, emotionless approach to life, to fixate on a moment so fleeting. Yet the harder Selah tried to forget, the more vivid the memory became, like a persistent signal from across the stars. One evening, beneath the shimmering radiance of Thalax's twin moons, Selah made a decision. She would find Cole. The notion was audacious. Such a personal quest was almost unheard of among her kind, whose lives were devoted to collective progress. But Selah knew she would find no peace until she sought the truth behind her memory. Her preparations were meticulous. Her starship, the Luminara, was a marvel of Thalaxian engineering, capable of crossing galaxies in moments. Despite its grandeur, Selah's focus was on the smallest details. She even packed a tiny crystalline orb from her childhood, a keepsake that emitted soothing harmonics. Her departure sparked both curiosity and concern. Her closest confidant, Alan, a being composed of pure light encased in a crystalline form, tried to dissuade her. Selah, Alan said, their voice a melodic hum, "This is a fool's journey. The universe is vast. Finding a single human is like searching for one grain of sand in an endless desert." Selah smiled, an expression rare among her kind. "Perhaps," she replied, "but sometimes the smallest grains hold the greatest weight." With that, she departed. The Luminara hummed quietly as it set course for the Milky Way galaxy. Selah embraced the solitude of the journey. It gave her time to reflect. As she neared Earth, anticipation surged within her. The planet teemed with life, chaotic and unpredictable, a stark contrast to Thalax's structured beauty. Her arrival was far from subtle. Earth's primitive satellites quickly detected her presence, and its defense systems buzzed with activity. Landing in a secluded area, Selah stepped out into the cool night air. The unfamiliar scent of Earth filled her senses, a strange, intoxicating mix of nature and industry. Her first interactions with humans were predictably fraught with misunderstandings. She attempted to communicate using light waves, only to be met with confusion. It wasn't long before she realized humans preferred verbal speech, a quaint and inefficient method that she found oddly charming. As she wandered Earth's cities and villages, Selah found herself both bewildered and amused by humanity. Their obsession with glowing screens, their love of caffeinated beverages, and their inexplicable tendency to burst into song at the strangest moments. It was all so strange, yet endearing. Still, the uncertainty of finding Cole weighed on her. Yet she pressed on, knowing that the journey itself held meaning. Each step brought her closer to understanding not just the human she sought, but humanity as a whole. Her quest led her to planets across the galaxy, each encounter blending humor with discovery. She stopped first at Lori, a world bathed in the soft glow of bioluminescent forests. The Loraians, beings of translucent beauty, spoke in poetic riddles about stars and travelers. Though their answers were vague, their lyrical words left her with a renewed sense of determination. From there, she traveled to Xiron, a crystalline world where inhabitants communicated through music and light. Joining their dazzling symphonies, Selah asked about human visitors. The Xyronians, ever playful, tried to mimic human forms with exaggerated, comical results. Though they lacked answers, their lighthearted antics eased the weight of her search. Her journey continued to Ferris, a water world where cities floated atop vast oceans. The Farians, shimmering amphibious beings, welcomed her into their underwater homes. They shared tales of a human who once drifted among their waves, a shipwrecked survivor who spoke of stars and solitude. Piece by piece, Selah's path unfolded. Though her search for Cole was uncertain, each encounter brought her closer to bridging the gap between their two worlds. The universe, vast and untamed, became her guide. And as the Luminara cut through the starlit expanse, Selah held tightly to the hope that somewhere, out there, Cole was waiting. Chapter 2. The Starlight Compass. Selah stood on the deck of the Luminara, gazing at the swirling nebulae that painted the starry void. It had been months since her journey began, and though she'd gathered fragments of stories and whispers of possibilities, none had led her closer to Cole. Yet she felt his presence like a faint echo in her mind, a thread of connection she refused to let go of. The crystalline orb she'd packed as a childhood keepsake sat on the console in front of her, pulsing faintly with soft light. It had become her anchor during the long stretches of solitude. Sometimes, when she held it, the orb would emit a subtle melody that reminded her of the fleeting moment she had shared with Cole. She wondered if it was her imagination, or if the artifact somehow resonated with her longing. Today, her course took her to Caliph, a remote outpost on the fringes of the Milky Way. Known as the Crossroads of Travelers, Caliph was a meeting point for explorers, smugglers, and seekers from across the galaxy. Its surface was barren and windswept, but its underground cities thrived with life, a labyrinth of glowing corridors and bustling marketplaces. If any place in the galaxy held the information she sought, it was here. As Selah descended into the depths of Caliph, she marveled at the diversity around her. Creatures of every shape and form bustled through the city's bioluminescent tunnels. Towering beings with elongated limbs, insectoid traders chittering over wares, and gaseous life forms floating in protective bubbles. She approached a weathered stall where a wizened merchant sat, his leathery skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. He was a Tarlian, known for their knowledge of interstellar travelers and their insatiable curiosity. "I'm looking for a human," Selah began, her voice calm but purposeful. The Tarlian tilted his head, his 6 eyes narrowing. "Humans? Rare visitors to this part of the galaxy. Why would a Thalaxian be interested in such a species?" Selah hesitated, explaining the depth of her quest to someone who thrived on trade and profit felt futile. Instead, she opted for simplicity. "It's personal. He may have been here, a man named Cole. Perhaps you've heard of him?" The merchant let out a low, rattling laugh. "Names are fleeting, Thalaxian. Faces, too. But stories? Stories are harder to forget." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've heard of a human traveler, a wanderer with the eyes of a stargazer. He was here some cycles ago, asking about safe passage to the outer rim." Selah's breath caught. "Do you know where he went?" The Tarlian's grin widened. "Information has its price." Selah frowned but retrieved a small crystalline chip from her satchel. The chip contained data valuable to the Tarlian's people, a star map of uncharted regions she had encountered on her journey. She placed it on the counter. The merchant studied the chip, then nodded in approval. He sought a ship to Carenes, a planet of drifting islands and eternal winds. But beware, Thalaxian. Carenes is no place for the faint-hearted. Its storms are fierce, and its people fiercer. Selah nodded, ignoring his warning. She had faced far worse than storms. With a brief thanks, she turned and made her way back to the Luminara. The voyage to Carenes. The journey to Carenes was turbulent, the planet's chaotic gravitational pull tossing the Luminara like a leaf in a hurricane. As she broke through the dense clouds that shrouded the surface, Selah was greeted by a world of breathtaking beauty and danger. Carenes was a realm of floating land masses, each suspended in midair by unseen forces. Rivers spilled over the edges of these islands, cascading into the endless abyss below. The winds howled constantly, carrying with them the scent of salt and ozone. Selah landed the Luminara on a rocky plateau and stepped out into the gale. Her shimmering form adapted quickly, her skin generating a faint protective field to shield her from the biting wind. The inhabitants of Carenes were as wild as their world. Humanoid, but with sharp, angular features and eyes that glowed like embers. Selah approached a group of them cautiously, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I seek a human traveler," she called over the wind. "He may have come here recently. His name is Cole." The Carenians exchanged glances before one of them, a tall woman with braided silver hair, stepped forward. "The human was here," she said. "He spoke of seeking a place called the Silent Spire, a ruin on the far side of Carenes. Few go there, and fewer return." Selah's heart quickened. "What is the Silent Spire?" "A relic of a forgotten age," the woman replied. "It is said to hold knowledge and secrets, but it is a cursed place, shrouded in storms and guarded by the shadows of the past." The Thalaxian's resolve only strengthened. If Cole had gone to the Silent Spire, then that's where she must go. The Silent Spire. The journey to the Silent Spire was treacherous. Selah navigated her ship through the violent winds and electrical storms that lashed the skies of Carenes. Finally, the ruin came into view, a towering structure of black stone that seemed to drink in the light around it. Landing the Luminara on a crumbling ledge, Selah stepped out into the storm. The air was thick with static, and the ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as if it might crumble at any moment. As she approached the spire's entrance, her crystalline orb began to hum softly. Startled, she held it in her hands, watching as it glowed brighter and emitted a haunting melody. It was the same melody she had heard in her memory of Cole. With renewed determination, Selah stepped into the Silent Spire. The air inside was cold and oppressive, the walls etched with strange symbols that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. Her every step echoed through the cavernous halls, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. And then, in the center of a vast chamber, she saw him. Cole stood with his back to her, his figure illuminated by the faint glow of a massive crystal suspended in the air. He turned slowly, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. "I thought I would never find you again, human," Selah said, her voice trembling with emotion. Cole smiled, his expression a mixture of disbelief and relief. "And yet here you are," he replied. The galaxy, vast and infinite, had conspired to bring them back together. But as they stood facing each other, the shadows of the Silent Spire shifted ominously, and Selah realized their reunion was only the beginning of a far greater journey. Chapter 3. The Shadows Awaken. The moment lingered between them, heavy with unspoken words and a fragile sense of relief. Selah took a step forward, her crystalline orb still humming faintly in her hand. Cole's expression softened as he looked at her, but there was a weight in his gaze, a burden that had grown in the years since they'd last seen each other. "I didn't think anyone would come for me," Cole said, his voice steady but quiet, as if he were speaking to himself as much as to her. Selah tilted her head, studying him. He looked different from the man she remembered, his shoulders more rigid, his face etched with lines of exhaustion. And yet, there was still that same quiet resolve in his eyes, the same spark of curiosity that had drawn her to him in the first place. "I had to," she replied simply. "You were the one thing I couldn't forget." Before either of them could say more, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. The massive crystal at the room's center pulsed with a dim, eerie light, and the symbols carved into the walls began to shimmer. Cole's expression darkened, and he stepped back from the crystal. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice tense now. "What do you mean?" Selah asked, her gaze shifting to the glowing symbols. Cole gestured toward the crystal. "This place, it's ancient, alive in a way I don't understand. The Spire is more than a ruin. It's been watching me since I got here. And now that you're here too, I think we've woken it up." As if in response to his words, the rumbling grew louder, and the chamber shook violently. Selah reached out to steady herself against a nearby wall. The crystal's light intensified, bathing the room in a harsh, flickering glow. From the shadows that danced across the walls, shapes began to emerge. At first, they were indistinct, like wisps of smoke curling through the air. But as the seconds passed, they grew more defined. Humanoid figures with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed like embers. "They're not real," Cole said quickly, his voice rising over the din. "At least I don't think they are. They've been following me since I found this place, but they never get too close." Selah's instincts flared. She stepped closer to Cole, her orb glowing brighter in her hand. "They may not be real, but they're not harmless either. We need to get out of here." Cole nodded, but his gaze lingered on the crystal. "There's something it's trying to tell us. I've been studying it, trying to make sense of the symbols. It's like a message or a warning." The shadows began to move, circling the pair with slow, deliberate movements. Their forms flickered, as though they were caught between existence and non-existence. Selah tightened her grip on her orb, feeling its hum vibrate through her skin. "Cole," she said sharply, "we don't have time for this. Whatever the crystal's trying to say, it won't matter if we're dead." Reluctantly, Cole tore his gaze away from the crystal and followed her toward the chamber's exit. The shadows surged closer, their movements faster and more erratic. One of them reached out, its hand passing through Cole's arm like smoke. He flinched, and Selah saw a brief flash of pain in his eyes. "They can hurt you," she realized. Cole nodded grimly. "Not directly. It's more like they drain something. Energy. Life. I've felt it before." Selah's mind raced. The Spire was alive, and these shadows were its guardians, or perhaps its prisoners. Either way, they couldn't afford to stay any longer. Reaching the entrance, Selah raised her orb and focused her energy. The glowing sphere emitted a burst of light, temporarily forcing the shadows to retreat. She turned to Cole. "Get to the Luminara. I'll cover you." Cole hesitated, his instincts telling him not to leave her behind. But the urgency in her voice left no room for argument. With a reluctant nod, he bolted toward the ship. Selah followed, her orb flaring intermittently to keep the shadows at bay. As they reached the Luminara, the ground beneath them shook violently, and a deafening crack split the air. The crystal within the Spire had begun to fracture, its light spilling out in jagged, blinding beams. "Go!" Selah shouted, pushing Cole up the ship's ramp. Once inside, Cole scrambled to the controls, his fingers flying over the panels. The Luminara roared to life, its engines flaring as Selah leapt aboard. The ship lifted off just as the Spire collapsed in on itself, the crystal exploding in a burst of raw energy that sent shockwaves rippling across the landscape. The Luminara bucked wildly as the shockwave hit, but its advanced systems held steady. Cole guided the ship higher, breaking through Carinesi's turbulent atmosphere and into the calm of open space. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines and the faint crackle of static over the comms. Selah finally broke the silence. "What were you trying to do back there, Cole?" "That place was a death trap." He exhaled heavily, leaning back in his seat. "I didn't go there by choice. My ship crashed on Carinesi after a storm hit me in the Outer Rim. When I found the Spire, I thought it might hold answers. Something about the ancient civilizations that left ruins like that scattered across the galaxy. But the more time I spent there, the more I realized it wasn't just ruins. It was alive." Selah sat across from him, her orb dim now, but still warm in her hand. "And the crystal?" "I think it was some kind of beacon," Cole said, his brow furrowed. "A signal meant for someone or something. It activated when I touched it, but I didn't understand what it wanted." Selah's gaze softened. It brought me to you. Maybe that was the point. Cole looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Then maybe it wasn't all for nothing. But as the Luminara sailed through the stars, the faint echo of the Spire's energy still lingered in Selah's mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that their escape had only set something greater in motion, something neither of them fully understood. And somewhere, deep in the void, a presence stirred, awakened by the crystal's destruction. Chapter 4. The Silent Watcher. The Luminara cruised through the void of space, its sleek frame shimmering as it passed through the faint glow of distant nebulae. Cole leaned back in his seat, the tension from their escape still clinging to him like a second skin. Across the cockpit, Selah sat in silence, her crystalline orb resting in her lap, pulsing faintly with each thought she pushed into it. "Do you feel it?" she asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Cole glanced at her, his brows furrowed. "Feel what?" Selah hesitated, searching for the right words. "Something lingering. A presence. Ever since we left the Spire." Cole stiffened. He had felt it too, a faint, gnawing sensation at the edges of his consciousness, like being watched from a distance. He'd chalked it up to exhaustion or his imagination, but hearing her confirm it sent a chill through him. "I thought it was just me," he admitted, running a hand through his dark hair. "Like a shadow that won't let go." Selah nodded, her expression serious. "The Spire wasn't just a ruin. Whatever we unleashed, it's still out there." Cole didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned his attention to the navigation console, inputting coordinates for a nearby system where they could resupply and regroup. He didn't know how to fight a presence he couldn't see, let alone one that might not even be tangible. The ship's AI broke the silence. "Captain Cole, sensors have detected an anomaly trailing us," it said in its calm, monotone voice. Cole straightened. "What kind of anomaly?" "Unclear. It does not match any known vessel or celestial phenomenon. The object appears to be shifting its form, and it is maintaining a consistent distance of 0.02 light-years." Selah stood, her orb glowing brighter in her hand. "It's following us," she said. Cole clenched his jaw, his fingers flying over the controls. "Can we lose it?" "Increase speed, engage cloaking systems. Anything." "Engaging cloaking systems now," the AI replied. The hum of the ship deepened as its advanced stealth mechanisms activated. For a moment, the anomaly disappeared from the sensors. The tension in the cockpit began to ease, until Selah gasped, her hand clutching the orb tightly. "It's still here," she whispered. "Not on the sensors. In the energy field. It's watching us." Cole turned to her, alarmed. "You can feel it?" She nodded, her gaze distant. "It's not physical. It's something else. Something ancient." The ship jolted suddenly, as though struck by an invisible force. Warning lights flared on the console, and the AI's voice returned. "Structural integrity compromised. An unknown energy field is attempting to breach the hull." Cole cursed under his breath, gripping the controls. "Selah, any ideas?" She closed her eyes, focusing on the orb in her hands. It pulsed brighter, responding to her concentration. "I might be able to hold it back, but I'll need your help to stabilize the energy field. This isn't just an attack. It's probing us, trying to understand." Cole nodded, his mind racing. "Tell me what to do." Selah moved to the central console and began to manipulate the ship's energy systems. "Redirect the auxiliary power to the shielding array," she instructed, "and open the containment matrix. I'll channel the orb's energy into the field." Cole hesitated for only a second before following her instructions. As he worked, Selah pressed the orb against the console. A surge of light erupted from it, spreading through the ship like veins of luminescent energy. The Luminara shuddered, its hull groaning under the strain of the anomaly's pressure. The cockpit dimmed, the only light coming from the orb and the faint glow of the instruments. Selah's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "It's sentient," she said. "It's not trying to destroy us. It's trying to communicate." Cole froze. "Communicate? By crushing us?" "It doesn't know how," Selah replied, her voice strained from the effort of maintaining the energy flow. "It's old, Cole. Older than anything I've ever encountered. It's curious, but it doesn't understand how fragile we are. The ship jolted again, and Cole gritted his teeth. Well, tell it to take a step back before it kills us. Selah's eyes glowed faintly as she closed them, her connection to the orb deepening. I'm trying. I need you to stabilize the output. It's overwhelming the system. Cole adjusted the controls, rerouting power to support Selah's efforts. The ship's AI reported declining energy reserves, but Cole ignored it, focusing on keeping the Luminara intact. Then, abruptly, the pressure eased. The ship's systems stabilized, and the anomaly's presence seemed to recede, though it didn't vanish entirely. Selah opened her eyes, her breathing uneven. It worked, she said softly. What did you do? Cole asked, his voice edged with disbelief. I gave it a glimpse, Selah replied, clutching the orb tightly. Of us. Of who we are. It was enough to satisfy its curiosity for now. Cole exhaled, leaning back in his seat. For now? That doesn't exactly fill me with confidence. Selah gave him a faint smile, though her expression remained tense. It's not hostile, Cole, but it's not done with us either. Whatever we awakened, it's tied to the Spire, and to us. We've only just started to understand what it is. Cole stared out at the endless expanse of space, his mind racing with questions. The silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of relief. It was the silence of something vast and unknown, waiting just beyond their reach. In the distance, the faint glow of the anomaly lingered, pulsing like a heartbeat in the void. Chapter 5. The Echo's Answer. The faint pulse of the anomaly lingered behind them, like a distant shadow too stubborn to fade. Cole leaned forward, his eyes locked on the navigation console. The Luminara coasted through the darkness, heading toward the nearest star system where they could recalibrate the ship. But in his gut, he knew this wouldn't end with a simple pit stop. Selah sat cross-legged on the floor of the cockpit, the crystalline orb resting in her hands. Its light had dimmed to a gentle glow, but her focus on it hadn't wavered. She seemed calmer now, though a subtle tension pulled at her features. You okay? Cole asked, breaking the silence. She nodded but didn't look up. It's quiet for now. Whatever it is, it's waiting. Cole frowned. Waiting for what? For us to decide, she said softly. Whether to run or face it. He let out a dry laugh. Well, considering it just nearly crushed us like a tin can, running sounds like the better option. Selah shook her head. It won't let us go. It's bound to us now. Running would only delay the inevitable. Cole groaned, leaning back in his chair. Great. So what? We just invite it on board for tea and hope it doesn't vaporize us? Selah finally looked up at him, her gaze steady. Not tea, but we need to meet it halfway. It's reaching out, Cole. We have to reach back. Before he could argue, the ship shuddered again, as though the anomaly had heard them. Warning lights flickered on the console, and the AI's voice returned. Anomaly proximity decreasing. Energy readings spiking. Hull integrity remained stable, but under stress. Cole cursed under his breath. Guess we're out of time? Selah rose to her feet, the orb clutched tightly in her hands. Take us out of hyperspace, she said. What? Are you insane? Cole snapped. Do you trust me? She asked, her tone quiet but firm. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the controls. He didn't trust her, or anyone, really, but something in her voice cut through his instinct to argue. With a sigh, he deactivated the hyperdrive. The Luminara slowed, the stars outside the viewport shifting as they returned to normal space. The anomaly appeared almost immediately, a swirling mass of light and shadow that shimmered and pulsed in the distance. It was beautiful in its own way, like a living nebula, but its presence sent a cold shiver down Cole's spine. Selah stepped forward, the orb glowing brighter in her hands. She placed it on the console, where it began to hum softly, resonating with the anomaly's distant pulses. What are you doing? Cole asked, his voice low. Opening the connection, she replied. Letting it see us fully. The ship trembled as the anomaly grew closer, its light spilling into the cockpit. Cole gripped the edges of his seat, every instinct screaming at him to take control, and get them the hell out of there. But he stayed still, watching as Selah closed her eyes and reached out toward the swirling mass with one hand. "Selah," he warned. "It's okay," she murmured. "It's listening." The anomaly stopped just outside the ship, its chaotic form stabilizing into something almost symmetrical. The pulsing light slowed, aligning with the rhythm of the orb. For a moment, everything was still. Then a voice filled the cockpit. Not a sound, but a feeling, like a melody vibrating in their minds. "You are fragile, and yet you seek." Selah's eyes opened, glowing faintly with the same light as the orb. "We seek understanding," she said aloud, her voice steady. "We seek peace." The anomaly pulsed, its light shifting to a deep, warm hue. "Peace is a fleeting construct. Yet, your kind dreams of it." Cole glanced at Selah, unsure whether to be terrified or impressed. "Is it judging us?" he muttered. She shook her head. "It's trying to understand. It doesn't see the universe the way we do." Selah took a step closer to the viewport, her gaze locked on the anomaly. "You were part of the Spire," she said, "a fragment of its creation. What do you want from us?" The light flared, and the voice returned. "To return. To reunite." The Spire called, "But it is broken. You are the key." Cole felt his heart skip a beat. Key to what? Fixing it? Or breaking it more? The anomaly's light dimmed, and for a moment, Cole thought it might disappear. Then it pulsed one final time. To choose. Before either of them could respond, the anomaly began to collapse in on itself, shrinking into a single point of light. The orb on the console mirrored its motion, glowing brighter and brighter until the cockpit was bathed in its radiance. Selah cried out, shielding her eyes, but Cole couldn't look away. The light burned into his vision, filling his mind with images, stars collapsing, civilizations rising and falling, and finally, a vision of the Spire, whole and complete, its energy radiating across the galaxy. When the light faded, the anomaly was gone. The cockpit was silent, save for the hum of the ship's systems. Selah slumped into the co-pilot's seat, her breathing heavy. The orb in her hands was dark, its glow extinguished. "What the hell just happened?" Cole asked, his voice hoarse. Selah looked at him, her expression weary but determined. "It gave us a choice," she said, "to leave the Spire as it is, broken and dormant, or to restore it and unleash whatever power it holds." Cole leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "And what happens if we restore it?" "I don't know," Selah admitted. "But whatever we decide, the galaxy will never be the same." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Finally, Cole sighed. "Well, if we're going to make a choice, we'd better be sure about it," he said. "Because once we do, there's no going back." Selah nodded, her grip on the orb tightening. "Then we move forward. Together." The Luminara turned toward the distant stars, its course set for the Spire. Whatever awaited them, they would face it head-on, their fates and the fate of the galaxy, bound to the decision they would soon make. And as the ship disappeared into the vastness of space, the faint echo of the anomaly's voice lingered in their minds. To choose. The end.